Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Why is nobody else protesting with us? We're not the only immigrants. Latinos are not the only immigrants. There's Europeans, there's from Africa, there's from Asia, there's from all over. Where are you guys at? Why are your people not standing with us? I know you don't want to call it upon you guys, but why are we alone in this? Go look at the videos of the protests that are going on. We are fucking alone. It's all brown-skinned people. Where are all the other races? You guys post all these fucking videos about it, but you guys ain't doing nothing with us. Where are you guys? Why are we alone? We support everything when it comes to you guys. We are always there for you. And this is why we Latinos are just different. We're different in everything. We're different the way we work. We're different with our morals. We're just different. This is why we're so hated. Because nobody will ever be like us. Because we are always there when people need us. But look at right now. We're so alone. And we're still standing strong. I think I've never been so proud of being a immigrant Latina in the USA. We're amazing. We're amazing.
The next day.
I wasn't going to make a video of this because I'm like, okay, whatever. Everybody took what they wanted from it. But I'm like, no, it's getting out of hand. I don't understand why all my black community got so offended by this. I was talking about all the other immigrants. Like I clearly said, all the other immigrants. And then another thing, I do understand that you guys fought so hard for our civil rights and these punk Latinos for Trump came and fucked it up. Like I totally understand that. I hadn't thought about it when I posted that video, but like after seeing so many comments, I'm like, it's so true. Like I can't even argue with you guys over that, right? But also have in mind, Mexican Americans or the Latinos that voted for Trump didn't suffer the things that you guys and we immigrants have. They've always been here and had everything. So for them, it was just so selfish to go and vote for them. There's over 47 million immigrants in the United States, and we cannot vote. We cannot vote. Some of us get a work permit, so all we can do is literally work. We can't leave our country. We can't do anything. We still have to pay our taxes, but we don't have no right. We don't have no right to say anything. So immigrants are not the same as these Latinos for Trump because we don't think selfishly. Whatever the people let him get away with, like if they see like, okay, we got all these immigrants out. Like, do you think he's done? You think his hatred is over with and his racism? Obviously not. This man is not okay. So guess what? Guess who else he's going to come for? You guys are going to be next. You guys are going to be next. And if we were united, we would be able to stop this fool. Because he would see we ain't no punks and we're sticking together. But here we are being his fucking puppets and being against each other. Like always.
Mr. Harvey Superboy, aka Your World, has a saying that America was founded by thieves, slaves, and opportunists. Immigration is almost exclusively economic in nature. Practically nobody immigrates due to political persecution. And what we've been seeing in the United States for the last 60 years is this principle on steroids. Well, the result of that happens to be a strange amalgamation of economic need and personal political desire. And that's what we see coming to a toxic head right now. But because of the fact that black people have been the vanguard of fighting against white supremacy and all forms of oppression, truth be told, in this country and around the world, everybody takes their cues from us. Because of the unique, indeed indispensable place that we have held in the moral center of the world for so long, it's real difficult to find other people who can fill that void, mainly because nobody has. And the thing is, black people have been doing all of this with the idea that we were trying to attract and build alliances. That's what we thought that we were doing. And yet everybody else just turned their backs on us and said, you know what, we're throwing in all of our chips with white supremacy. When DeSantis was pushing his anti-critical race theory hysteria, you had a lot of Cuban Floridians who were out there on board with it. A large number of DeSantis' campaign staff were in fact Latino, and yet many of them, like the Speaker of the Florida legislature and others, were backing DeSantis every step of the way, repeating all of his anti-black talking points. And when black people called out the racism, many of them were the first to say, why, it's not racist at all because we ourselves are quote-unquote people of color and or minorities, etc. and that they were fine with DeSantis' hate speech, so it couldn't be racist at all. And we also had similar things that were coming from the Asian community, such as people like Dinesh D'Souza and others, who were saying that they were on board with all of the anti-black talking points from the white right, and that's because, as far as they were concerned, they were the living proof that America couldn't be racist. Why? Otherwise, how could a feckless suck-up like Dinesh D'Souza have gotten all of that right-wing money that was stuffed in his pockets? People like him are artificial successes. They're the sock puppets of white power, and white power is willing to go ahead and put a couple of pennies in his pocket until he's no longer useful to them. And the same thing goes for people like Amy Chua and others. These people are, in a ton of cases, direct employees of these right-wing think tanks. They're the ones who buy their so-called books and publish them and such, and as a result, they act as sock puppets for them. But it's also true, though, that there have been a lot of these folk who are anti-black and have nothing to do with the right at all. Remember those racist Latino LA City Council members? They were all Democrats. And one of the people who was caught on those racist recordings was a labor leader, no less. Nothing conservative about any of them. And yet they were plotting specifically how to shut down black Los Angelinos out of the city positions and to make sure that city money was intentionally diverted away from black areas and straight to them. All the while, publicly, those same people pretended as if they didn't have a problem with black people at all. This is how deep, indeed sophisticated, the game of anti-black racism is. White supremacy has always understood the need for buffer groups. If you're going to keep people repressed for the long haul, you're going to need a way to keep the focus off of yourself, and that means buffer groups are going to have to be used to stand between the dominant society and those who its power is based on keeping oppressed. This is a trick as old as the Romans, by the way, which is the reason why white supremacy found it expedient to allow mass migration. Since the days of ancient Rome, bringing in large groups of outsiders as a means to basically confuse the political equation with those who were directly oppressed, that has always been a tactic used by the ruling class to go ahead and insulate themselves. What you're doing is you're tampering with the internal politics of those who are oppressed, and you're also trying to create the illusion that, well, see, the society can actually be made to work by the rules that the ruling class set up, when the reality happens to be that's not true at all. Now, the reason that you're not seeing black people who are getting out there and speaking up on this issue as far as mass deportation goes is for the same reason that you didn't see black people speaking up and deciding to take the side of the Palestinians, except for one idiot at a Kendrick Lamar halftime show. Black folks were getting on code and deciding that we are not going to get involved in third-party disputes. Why? Because these other groups do not reciprocate. It makes no sense for us to be advocating for anyone else when you got everybody else advocating against us. Now, in the past, you had some Negroes, many of them tethers, by the way, who were only too eager to jump out of a window and onto statues and hang off the roofs of buildings, losing their minds to try to prove that they were going to stand in solidarity with everyone else. See, this was the problem with all of those black folks in the 20th century who might have bought into certain Marxist ideologies. Individuals who were running around saying that it wasn't about race, it was about class, talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and all that garbage. No. When you take a look at the world today, you see that white supremacy did not set up this satanic carnival along the lines of class. If that was the case, they wouldn't be messing with all of these rich black people, now would they? They set it up along the lines of color. Race is the dividing line. Class struggle is what divides white people amongst themselves. But when it comes to black people, class has nothing to do with it. And in the past, you had a whole lot of black folks, people like Messi, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, Al Sharpton, all wanting to be the first to jump in front of the cameras and advocate for everybody else and make comparisons between how other people are momentarily inconvenienced and the civil rights movement. All these boomers trying to relive their heyday back in the 60s, that's what that was. And you even have people that I do have some consideration for, like Cornel West, who inappropriately called any and everybody else brother or sister, that kind of talk. That kind of rhetoric only works when people treat us like family. Now, my question is, have you seen anyone from any of these other groups who have been talking the same way about black people? I'll wait for that one. When people abuse you, call you names, and your response is to call them brother and sister, that's not some kind of high-minded egalitarianism. That's self-deception. And this is why we had to put our foot down and call an end to these civil rights retreads doing stuff like that, because they blurred the lines and created a lane for anti-black immigrants who would simultaneously make common cause with white supremacy, and then when the dominant society puts the screws to them, they get to pivot and claim that they're just like us. It needs to be remembered that you've had people, especially from these immigrant groups, who were only too happy to join in with the Ed Blums and others, attacking affirmative action such, and always making sure that they mention black people when doing so. They want to make it clear when they're talking about affirmative action, they're not talking about minorities or people of color. They're talking about black people. This is who needs to be purged from the universities, from the government, from any aspect or arena of daily life. This is about attacking black people. Now, what should have happened is whoever these individuals were who called themselves standing with the Ed Blums and others, they're the ones who should have met maximum resistance from these Asian groups because they were the ones claiming, well, we're doing this on behalf of Asian people. Where was the pushback? We didn't see any. Is the same reason why when Peter Liang found himself actually being charged for killing a black person, there were massive protests on his behalf. Meanwhile, when you had Asians who were killed by white people, especially white police officers, there was crickets. This is what's been going on in this country for decades now. This is what's been going on for generations, truth be told. And that's the reason why black people looked and said, you know what, we're not doing this thing anymore where we're trying to be building alliances and we're going to be speaking up for every oppressed and marginalized group out there. Because what we've seen time and again is that nobody has any problem with us being oppressed and mistreated. Nobody makes it a point that they're going to be speaking up on our behalf. Instead, we get people like Amy Chua and Juju Chang, both of whom happen to be married to white men. But in their minds, they think to themselves that their job is to be the main anti-black propagandist in media. And that matters because the entire reason that we got folks from the Hispanic and Asian communities who are asking where are the black folks at a time like this is they know that there is no substitute for the moral legitimacy that foundational black Americans represent. But that's exactly what Amy Chua and Juju Chang were attempting to try to undermine. The entire purpose of getting out there and spouting racist lies saying that black people are targeting Asians and black people hate Asians and all the rest of that, the entire reason of doing that was specifically to manufacture the lie that black people, they're just got it in for Asian people because black people, there's no real morality there. Those black people, they're not what you think. That was the entire reason of doing it. You do it so you can set black people up to be attacked afterwards. You're not doing it simply because, well, we can't really find anything else to say, so this is the gibberish we're going to throw. No. The very foundation of the black liberation struggle in this country for 500 years has been the undeniable fact that we occupy the moral high ground in an immoral society. And that being the case, how are you going to justify the racial pyramid scheme based on oppressing black people? Well, what you have to do is you have to impugn black people's morality. This is the reason why you had J. Edgar Hoover and others telling lies about Dr. King saying that he was committing adultery and such. I have had the challenge out there for 15 plus years. Anybody who can bring any actual evidence of Dr. King doing any sort of hanky-panky. And yet we get these idiots trying to push this urban legend that, Dr. King was sleeping around. There's recordings. Yeah, recordings that nobody's ever heard and that nobody can ever produce. Well, the FBI, you see, Dr. King was murdered in 1968. J. Edgar Hoover was still FBI director at that time and remained FBI director basically until his death. And that was in the 1970s. So you're telling me that J. Edgar Hoover had damning evidence about Dr. King, and apparently out of the goodness of his heart, he decided that this black man that he couldn't stand and that he spent most of his time demonizing and hounding and harassing him, that suddenly decided, well, we don't want to besmirch the good Reverend's character. Is that what I'm supposed to believe? No. These are lies. You got a bunch of people who, as far as they're concerned, they're doing the job of trying to impugn Dr. King's moral character and by extension, impugning the black community's moral character because that way you can justify mistreating black people on the grounds that, well, these are not moral people. And that's where you get idiots like Diane Yap and others spouting that exact same garbage. They know exactly what they're doing. So when Juju Chang was attacking black people under the guise of black people are targeting Asians, they know exactly what kind of fire they're playing with. They know what the narrative is. The narrative is it's okay to murder black people, and you really shouldn't be listening to black people about all of this Black Lives Matter stuff because, they're no different than the police when you think about it. That's the entire point of telling those lies. That's what needs to be confronted now. You want to know why it is that there's mass deportations going on? It's because all of these people who made it a point that they were going to play footsie with white supremacy, they created the conditions for white supremacy to turn around and say, well, now all of you people got to go, and you can't call it racist because for decades, the very people who white power is targeting right now have been claiming that they were either white on census forms, on job applications, and on driver's licenses, or in the cases of Amy Chua and Juju Chang and others, they would go along with the whole idea of the model minority. And that's dangerous in and of itself because it begs the question, model? Who is one modeling themselves after then? What does model mean? It's amazing how you got these very individuals who spend a lot of time dumping on black Americans. Juju Chang's real quiet right now. And so is Amy Chua, and so is Dinesh D'Souza. All of these folks, they're very quiet right now. Aren't they going to speak up about these immigration roundups? They're neither cheering them on nor are they denouncing them. They're just remaining silent. Can't even find them now. And this is the reason why you got people who are complaining, gee, we're the only ones out there. Where's everybody else? Well, by everybody else, what they mean are black people. Where are black people at? They need some black people to go out there and say, oh, this is wrong. Remember the 60s. Remember the fire hoses, this, that, and the third. Yeah, it makes sense that they would be asking where are black people at. It's because black people have always been the ones who have been out front. As I pointed out yesterday, the immigrant groups who have come here have had a ton of government programs and policies geared specifically to economically empower them. And then what happened afterwards was black people were watching this and going, well, surely these groups who we made it possible for them to come here, they are going to in turn point out, hey, black people are not being treated correctly. We need to ally ourselves with them. After all, we owe them the fact that we're even able to be here. Instead, what happened was the opposite. So where are the black people at? We're sitting this one out, just like we did with the Gaza-Israel conflict. I would suggest that any individuals who are wondering where is everybody else at, where are the black people at, well, I would suggest that they ask Juju Chang where she's at, or ask Nuri Martinez if she can go ahead and represent for them. See if you can drag Thomas Sowell's wrinkled behind out of mothballs, and he can go ahead and repeat some of his asinine talking points about how immigrants are better than black people. They outperform black people. Immigrants, they're more successful than black people in America, and that's just because of a superior culture. The problem is cultural. Right now would be an excellent time for Thomas Sowell to go ahead and get some FaceTime in on Fox News. Believe it or not, that wrinkled up idiot is still alive, believe it or not. And yet, he had a lot to say about DEI, but he hasn't had anything to say about this. Gee, I wonder why. It's because it goes against the BS narrative that he's been propped up and pushed out in front of the cameras in order to deliver for the last 50 plus years. Thomas Sowell's entire job was that white power credentialized him by giving him a degree in economics, and yet nobody ever goes to Thomas Sowell and asks his opinion when it comes to economics. When you had the economic crash back in the 80s, nobody gave a rip what he had to say about that. It was just like, well, why don't you go ahead and tell us how much better you are than black people? We got this guy who has an economics degree. He doesn't do anything with it, but, an economics degree, that means he must be smarter. At the very least, we can go ahead and prop him up and say, we give him some consideration. He's got an economics degree. Nobody asked him a doggone thing about the 1980s economic crash, the Great Recession. Nobody asked him anything about Bill Clinton's economic revolution in the 90s. Nobody asked him a question about anything when you had all of those corporations falling in the early aughts during W's administration, Tyco, Sunbeam, Adelphia, Enron. Nobody asked his opinion about that when the housing market imploded in 2008. Nobody asked his opinion about that, and nobody's asking his opinion about the economic malaise today. The only reason that Thomas Sowell is a thing, the only reason that anybody is cursed to know what his name is because white power invented him. He's an invention of the white right. But when you ask this guy, well, what's your area of specialty? You must be an anthropologist or something, right? Because you talk about black people all the time. You must be an ethnographer or something, right? Nope. He has no background in sociology, no background in anthropology, no background in any of that. He's supposed to be an economist, but you sure can't tell by listening because the only thing he ever does is whine and complain about black people. When it comes to economics, nobody cares what Thomas Sowell has to say. So obviously his economics degree is not the reason why you know who he is. That's just a phony means to credentialize a sock puppet punk. White power never had any permanent plans for any of the people that it uses. White power pretends to be their friend, and these people start thinking that they're on the team, that they're in some sort of alliance with the dominant society. But these white supremacists always have an exit strategy, and that exit strategy is always a double-edged sword. Not only does it give the dominant society a way for them to get out of any entanglements that they might have with their tools, but as we're witnessing, it also gives the dominant society a way to push the tools out too. All the way out. And speaking of out, that is where black people are going to stay on this issue and all of these others that have nothing to do with us. Everybody else made it where we had to hear them taking pot shots at us and telling us that apparently we were the problem, we were harming them, black people are just a bunch of failures and inferior and all the rest of it. Okay, fine then. We heard them heaping scorn on us, and now they can hear the sound of our silence. For a long time, you've had a lot of these opportunists like the Amy Chuas and the Dinesh D'Souza's and others. They could not wait to have the stage, as it were, all to themselves. As far as they were concerned, like Nuri Martinez and her racist pals in LA, they were going to be marginalizing the most marginalized community in the country. They were supposed to be easing us out or just shoving us out. And after that, well, it was going to be the Nuri Martinez and her racist pals show. It was going to be the Dinesh D'Souza and the Juju Changs and their racist pals show. Well, people made it a point to say nothing when black people were being attacked by these Latin American gangs, and people were making common causes with blatant anti-black racists like Ed Blum, and that being the case, if folks wanted to have the stage, as it were, all to themselves with no black people in sight, well, there's no sense complaining when you get exactly what you ask for. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Frederica Moore, David Williams, Wally Belisle, Sakina Collins, and Wesley Monroe. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.